All right, welcome everybody. This is session 34 of Classic Metal Class, and I'm joined here by my co-host Scott Tarulli, professor of guitar at Berklee School of Music. And this time around, we got kind of an off-the-wall topic, something that we've been chatting about for a long time, which is metal mashups. And I think the first one that I ever saw was years ago, the one where they mixed Rats, Round and Round, and Marvin Gaye's. I heard it on the grapevine. So we've been like kicking these back and forth for a number of years, and we thought, yeah, this would be a good topic to actually start to explore because there's a lot of cool philosophical issues that are sort of under the surface in metaphysics and ethics and aesthetics, but it's also kind of fun just to listen to these. And so that was something that we wanted to do, to go through them, see which ones are any good, which ones maybe shouldn't have been mashed up. And I'm going to tap Scott's technical expertise as a musician on a lot of this stuff because there's quite a few things that are I think it requires some explanation of how this stuff actually works. So as consumers, we don't need all that much, right? But if we're trying to figure out what the hell's actually going on with these things and how are they produced, I think it's helpful to know a good bit of music theory and history. So we also have some excerpts from some interviews with some fairly successful, whatever we're going to call them, I guess, masher uppers. Is there? Do you know, Scott? Is there actually a name for people who do this sort of thing? Or
I don't know. That's a good. I like yours, masher upper.
Okay. And so we've got a whole bunch of stuff planned. You can make comments in the chat, and we'll address those as we go on. So, and we also have a resource in the Teachable Class site under discographies, which is a list of all the mashups that we looked at. That included at least one heavy metal song. So it's Classic Metal Class. There's lots and lots of mashups out there that don't have metal stuff, but we wanted to look at those that at least have one or two in the mix. So we should start by talking about, well, what is a mashup in the first place? And there's a definition that's floating around out there: a musical work produced by taking two or more songs, blending them together, taking tracks from both works and coordinating them. And, it can include tracks of the same musical genre or different ones. That might be a little bit too broad for what we're looking at here because, what DJs were doing would count as a mashup, but that's being done like on the scene, on the spot, right? Sampling goes back a long time, goes all the way back to the 1940s. The first real instance of it is this Musique Concrète, where they were taking pre-recorded music and then putting additional music on top of that. And it was, I guess you could say, classical composers, but like cutting edge classical composers, right? And then other genres got into it: electronic music, funk, hip hop. So it's not a metal thing, to start with. And then we start seeing stuff in the 60s. There's this Harry Nilsson album, Pandemonium Shadow Show, which takes the Beatles' You Can't Do That and takes his own vocal recreations of a bunch of Beatles songs and puts it into the track. So that's a mashup, but only of one band. And the first commercially released mashup, and we're going to talk a lot about, the ins and outs of commercial stuff in this because it figures into ethics, is Do It Again medley with Billie Jean by Clubhouse, taking Steely Dan's Do It Again and Michael Jackson's Billie Jean. So there we have, I think, something closer to what we're talking about here. Two different genres, although not, very distant from each other. And there's more and more and more of these. We get a very funny thing where they're taking these whipped cream mixes using Public Enemy acapellas, instrumentals by Herb Alpert and the Tijuana Brass. So now we're getting to wider range of stuff than you would expect. And now, we're at the point where people can create these, and it's been going on, at least in YouTube, for at least 10 years. And it includes not just the musical mashups, but Scott and I were talking about this before, video mashups as well, which is kind of cool. So that's, I think that's enough of an overview of the history of it. So what does it actually take to produce a mashup? And here we're not asking about what does it take to make a good mashup. That's a separate issue, right? What does it take to make a mashup, period? So there is software out there, and one of the people who we're going to look at, Bill McClintock, he uses some pretty sophisticated software, and DJs have been using this software for a while. But this is where I wanted to tap you, Scott. So what happens when people are doing this? It's not so simple as just like saying, I like track A from song X and track B from song Y. Let's just fold them together. What has to happen for a mashup to happen?
Well, I think the hardest part is finding two compatible songs. So let's take the Marvin Gaye rat one.
Okay.
And what has to happen is the rhythm of the melody has to work with the rhythm of the song. And I don't mean synced up. You can sync these things up with software. I mean, if you and I were to jam and say, hey, you play the rat lick and I'll sing Grapevine, first of all, the melody rhythm has to work with the rhythm of the band. The second thing is the melody needs to work with the harmony of the band, which means when the chords change, the notes of the melody don't clash with it. They go with it. So to find two songs that are compatible, especially wildly different genres, that's the hard part is being creative enough to go, hey, will these work? And they can slice it up. They can like cut out a part of the song that doesn't work and edit it, but still the vocal has to rhythmically and harmonically work with the bass track that they're using, the basic track that they're using.
What about when you've got, so I mean, you've got a vocal track, right? And you've got, say, a guitar melody track, but what about the rhythm section? You got drums, you got bass, maybe a few other things incorporated in there. It seems like that is really key to what we could call like the skeleton of the song.
Yes.
So how do you combine those? I mean, do you just like remove one bass line from one of the songs and then you've got the bass line from the other song? Or is it possible to actually like put two different and genre different bass lines together and have them work?
Yeah, but with the examples that we have are basically like with the rat, it's round and round without the vocals.
Yeah.
And then it's only the vocals from Marvin Gaye. So it's not the music from the Marvin Gaye one. So that becomes less complicated. Like I said, the vocal melody has to fit in with the band, which is the rhythm section. And if the rhythm of the melody doesn't work in the first place, you can't really make it work. Or if you make it work, it becomes unrecognizable to the listener. Then they're like, well, these aren't the same songs. You've changed the rhythm of Round and Round, or you've changed the rhythm of whatever, or you've changed the notes of change the notes and the rhythm of the vocal. That's not that melody. So it has to be the melody and it has to be the song for people to actually have that reaction to it, where it's like,
yeah,
these are the same, these are the real tunes being combined.
One of the things we're going to talk about a little bit later, and I think it's coming from one of the interviews, is that if you're going to do a mashup, you basically have to take stuff that's recognizable to the listener. Otherwise, they're not going to know what the hell's going on. And it could be that, like, so some of these people are mashing up 3, 4, 5 songs.
Yeah.
It could be a way for a younger audience to discover stuff that they don't know about, or they've only, like they've heard the word Megadeth, but they've never actually listened to a Megadeth song or Twisted Sister or something like that. And then they could get interested in that. Actually, yeah, so here Dustin Ballard is asked, how do you select the songs you use for the videos? Are there certain criteria? And he says, I start with very well-known songs. The more familiar a listener is with the lyrics and melody, the stronger the dissonance when they hear that in the wrong form, whether it be a genre switch or a melody change to fit a different song it's being combined with. So that sounds like it confirms what you're talking about.
It has to work, but the chords going under the melody are going to be different.
Yeah.
It's just that they work now. It's just that they work. And it's funny that you say the multiple ones, because the Rick James one, if you notice, there's a George Lynch solo in the middle that's not on the Dio. So
Yeah.
they actually did 3 of them there. They actually put George Lynch soloing over the solo section of Holy Diver.
Yeah, it seems like we can say that there's lyric tracks,
Yep.
and those can be modified in certain ways, placed over different things. We
Yep.
have, what would we want to call it? I mean, you could call it the melody or the riff or something like that, which is being sampled. And then you have, I mean, what should we call them? Like accessories, spicing, little elements. So you mentioned guitar solo. There's also this really cool, and we're going to talk about some of these more. There's this really cool two metal song mashup taking Dawkins' It's Not Love and Rats Back for More. I think this is pretty successful, especially the intro, because you've got that riff that, I mean, if you like Rat, Back for More, right? It's an
Yeah.
iconic song. They play it at every concert. And then that guitar, I mean, it's a lot of our kind of like arpeggiated stuff leading into It's Not Love. They come together really, really well.
Yeah. And the technical part of that too is, if they're in a different key, you can make them in the same key with software.
Yeah.
And like, if they're not the same tempo, you can make them the exact same tempo in software. So that's, if anybody's wondering if they're just putting them up and they happen to be perfectly aligned, that's not the case.
So actually, let's head off in a different direction. Although let's take Andy's comment, and then we'll come back to the
Yeah.
question I'm going to ask you. So Andy says, interesting comment with respect to the melodies. One of the mashups we were listening to was very focused on the percussion elements, and that's how I was tracking the changes. I wonder if that's something about how we listen.
Sure.
And I kind of think that different people listen to different things. I used to play bass, so I'm always listening to the bass line, which is why I find certain very successful, popular musicians very boring sometimes. I'm like, oh, geez, it's just playing the root note the whole time,
Right.
And I don't pay that much attention to the drums, frankly. I imagine Scott as a guitarist. I mean, you listen to everything because you're
Right.
a practicing musician, but do you zero in even more on the guitars? Like when when you see a solo being done, are you watching the person's fingers to sort of follow along with what they're doing, or?
No, with a guitar solo, I listen to the whole band, because
Oh,
the
interesting.
the band, especially when it comes to any improvisational music, but even when it's the solo is planned out, the band is involved in the solo. So the band's not doing anything that would step on the solo rhythmically. So you want to hear how the solo sits in the band, and maybe the drummer's doing something cool to accent some of the rhythms of the solo. So
Yeah.
I think that's why most of the time they're using just the music from one band. And then so if once you get into using music from 2 songs, You got to be a little more careful. That's why it makes more sense for here's the music for one song, and then we're going to have the vocals from this totally other song. The vocals, as long as they rhythmically fit, the bass and the drums and percussion are not going to.
Yeah.
They're already together.
I mean, a lot of the really successful ones that we have, though, they are blending together two songs or two or three, and not just the vocals, but that takes a certain kind of virtuosity. So here's the question I was going to ask you. Now we've got software that can do this, right? Um, how would you do this analog?
Mm.
I mean, would you have to like have tape decks and you're like slowing some down and speeding some up? How would you change keys or pitches?
Well, if speeding up and slowing down would take care of the tempo, but it would cause a problem with the pitch,
Yeah.
the key. Um, I think if we were doing mashups back in the day, we would get musicians to play a sound alike, right? So like if you let's
So
say
go into the studio, take a particular song and change the key.
and do and have a click
Okay.
tempo to the vocal. Now this is assuming that now we
Interesting.
have you can Google any uh isolated vocal on YouTube. So if you want the isolated vocal to anything, you
Yeah.
can get it. But I guess if this was back in the day, I mean, this is still an assignment like at Berkeley, they'll do sound alike tracks just for the production side to see if the students can make a song sound as close to the original as possible. So I think the only way we would do it if we didn't have the technology we did now is a bunch of people would get together and go, okay, well, the vocals in this key, so we're going to change the trooper to this key,
Okay.
and then we're gonna make a click to the tempo of the voice. It's close enough, but it's not exact. We're gonna make it exact, and then over that you would put whoever's vocal it is.
Yeah.
I think that's the only way to go about it is musicians actually playing a sound alike.
And that brings up somebody who we included in the discography, which is this band that all they do is mashups, and they're called Rock Sugar.
Yeah,
And they've made a couple albums and they tour. And now this sounds like a way of doing analog because they're doing
right.
it in real time, what you're talking about. And they've got, things like Journey and Metallica, or Queen and Motley Crue. Like they've got one called "We Will Kickstart Your Rhapsody," which is very cutesy. Um, Rat and Journey, Round and Separated. Actually, the one of the ones that I really like is Guns N' Roses' "Welcome to the Jungle" combined with Till Tuesday's Voices Carrie called "Voices in the Jungle," and there you've already done the work of putting everything into the same key. It's obviously going to be the same tempo because it's one single
One
band
band.
playing a new composition. I
I
mean,
think, yeah. I was gonna say, I think the difference with that is the video aspect is hysterical. So the mashup alone live is cool, but with the videos like that we were watching, it's hysterical, especially when Dio's not singing, but he's going, yeah, like
yeah,
he really digs, like uh he really digs what's his name's singing in contribution to the tune. It looks like the band's really excited about what's going on. I mean, the visual part is kind of funny too, where it's like
yeah.
because he gives the thumbs up and he goes like this, like, yeah, keep going, this is when it's another singer altogether. So I think the visual, I, but I wouldn't be surprised if, well, I think, not to jump ahead, but I think in the notes you had mentioned somebody saying from a band, I love these and keep doing them because I want to do an album of mashups of my songs. Um,
Oh, yeah. Actually, that's coming from Bill McClintock, who's
oh
I
yes,
mean, he is probably like the masher upper extraordinaire. And he mentioned, so he's the guy who did the Rat, Marvin Gaye, Round and Round on the Grapevine, I think it might
yes,
be called. And he said that Bobby Blotzer
That's it.
contacted him, and he was a little bit worried because he was like, "Oh crap, are they going to be suing me?" And Bobby Blotzer was like, "Hey man, you should do a whole bunch of these, and it would be awesome." Actually, so he said, I've had several artists or official pages of those artists who are no longer with us share my work. So that includes the Van Halen News Desk, Rat, Pantera, the Bangles, Zach Wild, Rick James, Motley Crue, Motorhead, David Coverdale, Within Temptation, Frankie Banali of Quiet Riot, one of the Spice Girls, and Nile Rodgers of Chick. Now, the Nile Rodgers of Chick is very interesting because he's
Yes.
somebody who's like, we actually, Andy was just reminding me of this when we saw Chick or Chic and Duran Duran. Chic opened for Duran Duran, and Niles Rodgers was getting up and he's like, "Oh yeah, I wrote this song," and he'd play a song it was
Yeah.
recorded by somebody else. He'd be like, "Holy crap, that was him!" So he's got this huge repertoire, and they do a lot of kind of like remixing of stuff, right? So it's interesting. It would be sort of like getting a compliment from somebody who's really good at what they do.
Well, it's what speaking of there's we were mentioning sampling, but that guitar riff to Good Times, the Chic tune,
Yeah.
who in the 90s a band took that track and then like kind of rapped over it, and it was kind of like a mashup, but like
Well, I mean,
mashup.
yeah, I mean, think about is it Funky Cold Medina
Yeah,
uses
Jamie's crying.
Jamie's Crying. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think the legal regime was a lot looser back then. You could get away with a lot more stuff, and then they started clamping down on the sampling thing.
But that was definitely not parody. That was definitely selling records.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I would say the hip hop people were the first to really in a broad way realize just how much you could do with other people's music, you
Yeah,
know.
and that happened with who was it? And they did Kashmir, but Jimmy Page ended up joining them for that.
Oh, was it
Um,
was it a rap or hip hop artist
yeah,
that was doing it? I
it
don't
was a
know
rap
that.
artist, and it
That's
was
interesting.
basically Kashmir playing while he raps over it. But some of it led to collaboration. But I always thought it was interesting because, like, well, what's the one that used Under Pressure, right? The famous one, the one
Oh,
where
Vanilla Ice is Ice Ice Baby. Yeah.
it, I think my point was not only is it the riff, but it's the bass player from Queen that's playing on it. Because
Yeah.
and then you're going to try to argue that, oh, it was just a sample of them playing, but it is their playing. I
Yeah.
mean, it's like I can't buy a record at the store and play it and then post it online and go, oh, but it's not really them playing. You can't do something
Playing
like
through my record player.
play through my record player. Yeah, I mean, I would get in trouble for that.
Yeah, I think that maybe part of the issue there is you can make a distinction between how much you're transforming what it is that you're bringing in. If you're just like let's say you're gonna take um well, let's say you take Rats Round and Round, right? And
Yeah.
you strip out Stephen Percy's voice. You still have Juan Crouchier's voice in there, who, the second voice of Rat, and then you sing yourself over it, which is essentially what karaoke is, right? So
Yes.
imagine that you're in a karaoke place and you video record you singing Round and Round, and you do a great job and the lighting is good. So you put it up on YouTube and you're like, "Hey, check me out singing Round and Round." And you don't even put like Rats Round and Round. You're like, "This is my version of Round and Round." Okay, that's clearly BS.
Yeah.
Right? That's at one extreme. But what if you took both the vocal tracks out, and what if so imagine it's you and me, right?
Yeah.
And I'm, somehow I've like actually like put in the time to be able to play the bass line, and you're playing the lead guitar on it, and you've already made another guitar track, right? So you're doing DeMartini's part, and you're also doing Crosby's part. And then we use the drum track from it because neither of us can drum,
Right.
and we're singing it, but we're not singing it well because neither one of us are like trained singers. And we're not bad, but we're not, we're not that level. It's, and maybe we take a few liberties, like we add an additional verse or a bridge or something like that. So it is transforming it, right?
Right.
But it's still rats round and round. It's still their intellectual property, isn't it?
Right. It is. Oh yeah. Yeah. Just because you make a slight change in the melody or something, um, yeah, we wouldn't get away with that.
Yeah.
Um, but it's funny because they have bots that, like, I've even like done a transcription of, say, Keith Jarrett, and I'll play along with the recording, and the second I upload it, it gets flagged as, I'm using somebody's intellectual property. um I have to go through this whole thing, but mine's for educational purposes because I'm saying, hey,
Yeah.
here's a
Yeah.
guitar player playing, this, and you can learn some cool phrasing stuff and some time stuff from this. And I don't use the whole song. I just do the improvised solo bit. But they allow me to post it after that I make the case for education. The record company's fine with me posting it after that. Now, if I didn't have that argument, like I have friends that just put it up to kind of like play, and they'll get theirs taken down most of the time,
Yeah.
or muted. They mute them. Sorry.
I have recorded a lot of video footage of live performances at metal shows over the years and uploaded them in a channel that keeps them unlisted.
Yeah.
Not my main channel. And it used to be that they would just upload and, no big deal. And then about maybe, I don't know, 3-4 years ago, they'd all start getting flagged. But what was interesting is it would flag it and say, this is somebody else's stuff, but they're cool with it because whatever monetization you've got on it, that's going to go to them. It's sort of like, doing a cover song as a commercial artist.
Now it's interesting that you got flagged for a live version, because I don't know if you've ever noticed, and if any listeners or viewers notice, if you go to YouTube and say you play music and you'll notice that
Oh,
the music is
yeah.
out of tune. And so they put the music a little out of tune so the bots won't recognize it. Um,
Yeah.
so if
I
it's not
don't I
exactly
don't
like,
think that's gonna be a successful long-term strategy, though.
I don't think so either. And especially that your story with the live version getting caught, we've come a long way with that, because the bots must be more sophisticated now.
Yeah. I mean, to be able to take a Ace Frehley, song, like Rock Soldiers, for example. So I've got video of that, him playing here in Milwaukee. Within like a minute of uploading it, it was like almost instantaneous. They knew it was him. And it's a different song,
Yeah.
when somebody like Ace Frehley is playing, you're getting a different show every time.
Yeah, that's true. I'm sure they've become pretty advanced. And I think the thing is, even if it's wrong,
Yeah.
even if it notice it, you could say it's not, because they have a list. I have the band's permission. I am the band.
Right, right.
All that stuff. Or one of them could be, well, actually, it's not. You're flagging something that's one of my songs, and that's, you think it's something else. Um, but I think the initial thing is to stop it, which I guess nowadays, I don't know why we're nitpicking about this. I mean, bands give it away on streaming for fractions of a penny. Um, so to come down hard on people, I mean, bootlegging and all that, it doesn't carry the weight it did, say, in the 90s,
Yeah.
when
I
you
mean,
would,
it's interesting because you use that word bootleg because that was one of the terms that was used for mashups. Not exactly bootleg, but boodle. They also called
Poodle,
it
yeah.
bastard pop or blend.
I love
Um,
that one when I
yeah,
read. that one made me laugh.
Yeah. So one other thing, as we're talking about like the ins and outs. So going back to an issue that we were hitting on before. So two guys that we found interviews of, Bill McClintock and Dustin Ballard. They're both asked, "Are you a musician? Do you have any musical training? Does that affect it?" And so Bill McClintock says, "Yeah, I've been playing guitar for the past 20 years, and I have a degree in music." With a concentration in music technology and music education. Dustin Ballard says, "It would be hard to imagine pulling any of these off if I weren't a musician. Changing a melody to fit a chord structure it was never intended for requires some, so one, on the one hand, basic theory, and on the other, a musician's intuition." Um, and so I think that's kind of important. You can't just cut and paste and click a bunch of buttons. You have to have, on the one hand, some actual technical expertise that could be
Mhm.
communicated, but then there's this aspect of, as he's calling it, intuition, right? A sense for the feel of it, right? Which is what like a good producer has. Um, so not anybody could just cut and paste these things together and make a decent mashup, right?
No, absolutely not, because they'd have to understand the melody and the harmony just to begin with. If it goes to a chord that's sour with the melody, it's really gonna. I mean, even anybody, a musician or non-musician, is gonna react poorly to it.
Yeah.
You really have to know what you're doing, um, and then you have to know some of the forms may change, but I didn't hear them change any chords in the songs. But they may say, okay, well, to fit the melody, we're just going to move this part over here. Uh,
Yeah, I think you could like stretch things out or compress them,
right,
time wise, not in terms of actual like compression as an
right.
effect, but um, that could work, you know. Well, so let's talk about some philosophical issues. So, and actually, let's just jump right into ethics. So these are considered transformative of original content, and they might find protection under the fair use doctrine of copyright law, but maybe they don't.
Right.
So there's this interesting article from 2013 by Noah Berlotsky, which is titled "Can There Be an Ethical Mashup?" And the 3 points that he made that I thought were germane here. So and you and I talked about this a little bit. Most mashups aren't parodies; they're straightforward, albeit very creative borrowing of another's work. So it's not just commenting on works of art; it's combining them. So that seems important. It also is an interesting point. The fact that artists often seem happy to ignore or even support mashups of their work suggests that the ethics of mashups can be even more complicated than the legal issues surrounding them. There's no doubt a mashup can promote the music it borrows, and sometimes artists even use them as promotional tools. So, like David Bowie offered a sports car to a mashup artist who best combined two of his songs. But that's David Bowie. That's
That's
not
big
like
flow,
your
yeah.
ordinary musician. That's somebody who's like super committed to innovation anyway, and a pretty cool guy. And then the last thing, so there's a paradox or a balance here. Creating mashups without compensating remixed artists may be unethical, right? Because you're taking their stuff without their permission and making something out of it. But on the other hand, it seems like mashups are a new creative art form, and you don't want to just strangle it by saying you have to get permission every single time. And so, there's sort of a gray area here, right? So let me ask you this: as a musician, where do you sit on this sort of thing?
I understand the legal part and why it exists. I think the key thing is, are we calling this parody? And
Okay.
who gets to decide? Now, I agree. I think so it's not a complete song. Let's take let's just go back to Round and Round.
Okay.
It's the song, but the whole presentation of the song is different, and musicians themselves seem to love to be involved in it. I mean, they probably die laughing, at
Yeah.
like how this is working, and so that's one of the points that the lawyer makes, is that on the other hand, we don't have any artists that are going, "Hey, you owe me money on this." Um, so
Yeah.
I mean, this is ethics versus law, perhaps, because like I said, for this to actually get into legality, the bands would have to start a lawsuit.
Yeah. It's interesting too because you don't mash up unsuccessful artists typically, right? So all the mashups that we looked at, they're they're all, sort of like top or second tier acts, whether in metal or in something else. And you could be like, well, how much more money does Van Halen need? Or isn't Black Sabbath doing okay?
Oh,
Or
you mean you think that's why that they might not start a lawsuit, is because they
well, I mean, to begin with, are you going to get much? These are all on YouTube,
right,
and okay, you do have advertising revenue that comes in.
which is an important point.
Yeah, but it's probably not all that much by comparison to the heyday of great record sales or advances or stuff like that. I mean, the music, we've talked about this a lot
True.
before. The music industry is much tougher and much tighter and leaner now than it was in the past. But that seems to apply much more to the bands that are starting out or have been struggling for a while. Like if somebody, so, let's take Raven.
Yeah.
Raven has been touring continuously and making albums with a brief hiatus when the guitarist had his back broken because of a bunch of amps falling over on him.
Oh God.
But they've never broken up. They've continually put out stuff. They had to do a Kickstarter for their album Extermination back in 2000. I think the Kickstarter started in 2014 and the album came out in 2015. They tour a lot, and clearly they're okay, but they're not making tons and tons of money. So if somebody were to take, I don't know, Ravens On and On, probably their most successful single, I imagine, and then mix it with some other genre of stuff, and it were to get 10 million views, there might be some decent um, ad revenue coming from that Raven could say, "Hey, we'd like some of that," right?
Oh
But
yeah.
but if it's like, you're mixing Kiss stuff. I mean, Kiss is a mega franchise. Gene Simmons and Paul Stanley don't need any more money. They've got enough.
Yeah, I mean, but the reason that they have so much is they are kind of nitpicky about all that.
Yeah.
They kind of jump all over everything. And I'm kind of curious if what would happen if you uploaded a Kiss song. I mean, it would probably get flagged immediately, but I mean, would you get to see Bon Jovi's as well? Bon Jovi seems to have enough money, but he sent cease and desist to tribute bands.
Oh, really?
So,
Interesting.
well, I shouldn't say he. I think the record company has more interest in protecting their investment. So
Yeah.
a lot of times it's now in the case of Raven, they raise their own money. So it's not like
Right.
the record company's going, we need to recoup our 20 grand we gave them to make the album. And you're not gonna, we're gonna get it from you who's doing a mashup. But the ad revenue makes sense because now the person who did the mashup's not really making any money off of it.
Yeah. And to be frank, you really have to get a lot of views to make much money on YouTube anyway,
Oh my God.
So
Yeah. Well, it's kind of odd because, you know, at the same time, these bands are willing to put their music on streaming, which takes insane amount of listens
yeah.
just to get something that wouldn't be a living wage in the first place.
I think that's one of those results of like everybody else is doing it, so
Right.
there's like that fear of missing out that everybody gives into, and then it becomes like the new paradigm, you know?
Yeah, that's
Um,
what I've seen is you ask a lot of people, you know, because you see them complain that
yeah,
they're being treated unfairly. And I would say this is a service. You don't need to use it. Stop complaining or pull your stuff off. You know, and I'm one of the people that's had their stuff pulled from streaming because it's a bad deal. And it's I kind of call it like going fishing where everybody else is already fishing. You know,
oh, yeah, yeah.
it's like it's so oversaturated, and it's like the argument is, well, somebody could find you, and I say, well, I could go to the train station and play where people go, and I could get discovered there too, like Tracy Chapman did. And what's stopping me from doing anything that makes it possible to get found out or something? So but
Yeah.
it's interesting that slides, but then we're being kind of people will be meticulous over, say, a mashup. Um,
Yeah.
but I think it's kind of like they want to be in on the joke too. It's kind of like not the joke. I don't know what I'm trying to say. It's a cool concept. It's hysterical to see your metal band with Marvin Gaye, or it's cool. You know,
Yeah, that's an interesting point. So these are not parodies. Weird Al Yankovic is
parody.
parody stuff, right? Um, but there is you're right. There is a funny aspect to it, or humorous aspect. Um, so should that figure into it? Should that be viewed as like some value added, bringing these things together?
And I think the
I mean,
funny part is the visual. Would you say?
that's a significant part of it. I mean, when you see so one song that gets combined a lot is "Jump," right?
Right.
And we've got one that we are looking at, and again, this is a Bill McClintock because he's the one who puts together like 4 or 5 different things. So there was one. Oh no, this one's actually by Wax Audio. Van Halen plus New Order plus Duran Duran plus Tears for Fears, and they're all kind of mixed in together there. And when you see like David Lee Roth jumping or stuff like that, it is pretty funny to see him
Yeah.
jumping over the background of a New Order song. You know, um, I think too these Christmas mashups, they're clearly funny. They're
Yeah.
nobody's like, this is going to be the next Christmas song. We need to take this very, very seriously. So, like, combining Metallica's "For Whom the Bell Tolls," a very, very serious song, right? About people dying and warfare, with "All I Want for Christmas Is You" by Mariah Carey. That's pretty funny. As a matter of fact, Mariah Carey seems to get put into that a lot. So there's a Twisted Sister, "We're Not Going to Take It," plus Mariah Carey song. They also combined it with Feliz Navidad. Um,
Yeah.
they called it Josef and Heliano, and talking about Feliz Navidad. And they took AC/DC and blended it together with Brenda Lee's "Rocking Around the Christmas Tree" to have "Dirty Deeds Around the Christmas Tree." So that sort of stuff clearly is comedy, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And that band that we mentioned, Rock Sugar, there's a humorous aspect to that as well. I mean, putting together Adele and the Scorpions, "Roll You in the Hurricane," um, that's pretty funny.
I mean, just the titles alone make you laugh.
Yeah, yeah. So, again, I think from an ethical perspective, you can say there's a value added there. And it doesn't have to be like a, earth-shaking monumental value, but, you're contributing something new by making it have that humor to it, right?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because we should note too that doing a live performance based off of others music like this band does, every venue, so ASCAP is a publish is where you can set up your publishing company. So me as an artist, I'm an ASCAP, which means I upload all my music. This is my music. It's copywritten, and anybody that uses the music, I get paid for.
Okay.
And most of the venues are BMI ASCAP venues. BMI is another one. It's the same as ASCAP, just a different company. And so I'm kind of curious with this, with the set lists, if the money is sent to the bands automatically, because you have somebody that's on tour
Mm.
pretty much playing cover songs, because well, it might be 2 and 1
Yeah,
if
yeah.
ASCAP recognizes that, and the band doesn't have to pay it. I mean, it's just that the song was performed in a ASCAP venue.
Okay.
Um,
Does the venue pay it then, or?
yes, the venue pays a monthly or yearly thing to ASCAP,
Oh, okay.
and so like they're already ASCAP's already receiving. Now, technically, if I go in one of these venues and play my songs all night, I'm supposed to get money for my performance of it in the ASCAP venue. But
Yeah.
because actually they have a new um, app now called Backstage, where when I play my song in, let's say, the Berkeley Performance Center, which is an ASCAP venue, I could write in, I just played this set at Berkeley College of Music, and then I'll get compensated for it. But Berkeley already pays the dues every
Yeah,
year.
yeah.
And so it doesn't cost Berkeley anything more. It's just, here's whatever we
You
owe
would
you.
get like a tiny percentage of those dues.
I would get something.
Yeah, yeah.
It wouldn't be much, but
It's
but
not as it's not as lucrative as writing a textbook and making all your students buy your textbook or something like that. We had, by the way, this is totally off topic, but it does touch on ethics. We had a guy when I was in graduate school who wrote a ethics textbook, and he taught this really crappy but very popular ethics class where he required the students to buy his crappy textbook, and he told all of his TAs 80% of the students should get A's and B's. It's up to you to figure out how to make that happen. So, of course, standards were super, super low. And if you TA'd for him and you gave too many C's and D's, you'd get canned as his TA. So his classes, and he would teach to like an auditorium of 300 people. His classes filled up every semester. He sold 300 copies of his textbook, guaranteed. It was quite a racket that he did. And,
it's
the fact that it was ethics,
that's what I'm saying. It's ironic that that's an ethics class, and I'm wondering if some of the teachings go against exactly what he's doing, right?
Yeah, clearly. I mean, a lot of his stuff was basically just kind of watered down utilitarianism and Sartrean existentialism. So he covered his butt pretty well. Didn't bring in anything too challenging for the students where they might be like, "Hey, this guy's kind of a hypocrite." So
Right. I mean, that's so funny, because I mean, that's that's one way to get your classes filled, is be lenient if you need the hours, if you're adjunct, right?
yeah. Well,
It's one.
he was a full-time tenured professor. So
Oh
this is
god,
like
this
this
is
is
book sales.
Yeah, I mean, it was a great revenue stream for him, I think, and he wasn't gonna do anything to upset that, so,
Oh my god.
yeah.
The, speaking of ethics, wow.
There
But
was one other thing that I wanted to bring up in the ethics section. So, you know, AI is a big topic, understandably so, in the workplace and academics. So, Dustin Ballard got asked about, with the rise of AI in songwriting, are there any challenges or concerns you have with using likenesses of people's voices? And he said, in my opinion, there are very limited situations where it's moral to replicate someone's voice with AI. Everything I do is clearly labeled and parody. Nobody's being misled into thinking Hank Williams actually saying Straight Out of Compton. I often compare it to Photoshop. The Onion can create a realistic altered photo of a celebrity, and nobody has any issue with that because it's not actually misleading. The way I use AI, and so you're saying I do use AI, is basically the audio equivalent of that. So, as AIs get more sophisticated, you could well imagine somebody producing a program that you would just say, I'm not a musician, but I would like to have a mashup of Iron Maiden's The Trooper and Gloria Gaynor's I Will Survive. Make it happen, oh wonderful AI. And then, they would put it out there on YouTube or whatever is their own new work. And so that would clearly be unethical, right?
Well, that would take the art out of the mashup.
Okay, so that's an interesting distinction. So in order for it to be an ethical mashup, there still has to be some art, some skill, some techne there, right?
Yeah, like we were saying earlier when they interviewed, are you a musician? Well, I have to be.
Yeah.
I mean, with AI, I mean, I read that quote in the notes about there's very few places AI is ethical, and I agree with that. Especially when you're using the likeness. I mean, right now, artists, it might maybe too late for me, but you lawyer up and you protect your likeness. So
Mm,
if somebody uses AI to replicate you, you're protected.
yeah.
Uh, and I don't know what that document looks like, but
Yeah.
but a lawyer does. So I
Now,
mean,
your likeness, so we usually think of that in terms of visual stuff, but as a musical artist, is part of your likeness your style, you know?
yes.
Okay.
So this is why voiceover artists are out of work now suddenly, because people just use AI to do voiceovers, and you can
Oh,
say, I want it to sound like this person. So let's say you and I were voiceover actors, but then somebody said, well, we're going to do this script, but in Greg Sadler's voice.
yeah.
And then now you're out of a job, but they're still using your voice for so that's that's what's going on. So instead of hiring me for a session, or Nile Rodgers for a session, or somebody big, they won't hire them. They'll just say to AI, well, make it like what Steve Lukather would do, or
Yeah.
make it what Mike Landau would do, and make it sound like that. And I don't know how, I still don't think it's the same thing, no matter how advanced it gets, because you don't know what Mike Landau would come up with that for that song, and it's
Yeah, yeah.
arguably going to be better than what AI comes up with.
It's interesting. I just saw um earlier last week that a new version of Rat, which is not calling itself Rat, is going to be touring, and it's going to include Stephen Percy on vocals, Warren DeMartini on guitar, and Carlos Cavazo on guitar. And it's not including Juan Croucier on bass. They got a different bassist, and of course they've got a different drummer because
Right.
Bobby Blotzer is totally on the outs with Rat. Every other member, he can't get along with anybody. They had Jimmy DeGrasso when we saw Rat in 2017, when it had those three original members: DeMartini, Croucier, and Percy, and Carlos Cavazo on guitar. And he's arguably a Rat member because he did an album with them, and,
Yeah.
and he gets along super, super well with DeMartini. Those two play really well together. And you talking about like doing voiceovers makes me think, okay, so with a band like Rat, and actually I think you could say this with Van Halen, with Michael Anthony as well. You don't have just one singer. You have a main singer, and then you have an basically irreplaceable second singer who does the high end and gives you the full sound that you need in that case. And now, maybe they're going to use backing tracks or something with something that's derived from Juan Crocier's voice, because frankly, Stephen Percy on his own doesn't sound that great. Now,
No.
David Lee Roth or Sammy Hagar without Michael Anthony singing behind them, they sounded better. And actually, way, way back in the day, I think you could say that uh, Stephen Percy sounded pretty good too. But in the present, if you're missing that, so you really need something to come in there and give that track. Maybe they're going to do it with AI. I don't know.
I mean, you wouldn't need AI. They could just take it from the tracks. I mean, there's a lot of stuff people are using
Yeah.
AI for that it's not necessary to use AI for.
Oh, interesting. Like, what would be examples?
Well, say, okay, well, the first argument was, well, it could write a pop song.
Yeah.
So can I. It could write one like Justin Bieber. So can I. Like,
Yeah.
and then their thing was, well, it could write the Bach orchestra that was never written. So could any student of composition. That's their assignments is
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
study Bach, and then it's like, now you have to write something in the style of Bach. And
I'm interested in the examples in part because what they show is people are reaching for the AI to do these things. And I think a lot of people don't have any conception that AI is like using incredible resources. It
oh
sucks
yeah,
up water, it sucks up electricity. It's very, very inefficient, not ineffective, inefficient in terms
yeah,
of allocation of resources. And we probably shouldn't be using AI for a lot of the things that we are, not just because it makes us stupid and lazy. I mean,
yeah,
Microsoft actually put out a paper recently where they're like, it's screwing up people's critical thinking abilities because they're not actually like, sorting things through and doing research and all that. But it's also it's bad for the environment. It's a waste of lots and lots of resources. So yeah.
I think the thing too is a lot of everything's reaching to instant gratification. So
Yeah.
there was a seminar on AI and how wonderful it is for songwriters, right?
Yeah.
So in other words, it's like, I mean, you wouldn't need AI for this, but just a couple of the stupid example. What rhymes with this? Or what I'm trying to say this word, what word would be good to use? And you don't need AI for that. You're just taking away the artist's opportunity to grow
Yeah. Yeah.
and get used to thinking and getting better and better at their craft rather than not progressing by getting an easy instant answer. It doesn't help songwriters, it hinders songwriters. But it's so funny, the pro AI people, I've read and watched a lot of this stuff. There's stuff at NAMM, the music conference that I went to on AI, and it's just there's just gaping holes in their arguments or stories. And yeah, lazy.
Yeah.
How are we going to grow as people if we don't? If things are painful, things are a struggle, and that's how you start out when you're younger, or you see something through, you see a task through. Maybe it's not that great this time, but it might be better next time.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I think there's even a danger for people who have been doing what they ought to do for a while, being like, I don't have to do this routine crap anymore. Let's let the AI handle it. And then your skills decline,
Your
you
skills, yeah.
know?
Oh yeah. And or now it's something that you don't need. Like, it sounds like a lot of the stuff, if somebody's going to do a mashup but they have no skills and they can
Mm,
still do the mashup, you don't need skills to like. And
yeah.
and you see stuff AI generated on YouTube that's, you could tell it's AI generated, but they're trying to pass it off as,
Yeah.
whatever.
I mean, I think that there's a certain kind, so this will lead us into the talking about aesthetics. I think there's a certain kind of virtuosity that is displayed by some of these combiners, particularly this Bill McClintock guy. So, great example of a couple of these that we found. Um, there's one that's Herb Albert, Black Sabbath, Metallica, and Dokken, and you'd be like, how in the hell are you going to combine those together?
Right.
And it works, or combining the Who's Eminent Front with Metallica's Creeping Death and Megadeth's Holy Wars. That works really well. He's got another one combining Yes's Owner of a Lonely Heart, which is like the main track for this, and it's also got like little bits of Devo's Whip It, Van Halen's Ain't Talking About Love, and towards the end of it, you get Dio's Rainbow in the Dark. And being able to do that, so you could like say, hey, take a random selection of popular songs, computer, and put them together. I mean, it could by brute force, here's a million different combinations of these. It
Right.
might wind up on that, but almost all the rest of it is going to be crap. Whereas this guy, I mean, now he probably, and we should, it'd be kind of cool to ask him. He probably made 30 versions of that before he hit on the final one. And he's like, this one's off a bit. I had something else in here before that I had to take out. We don't see all the backstory of it.
We don't see the
But
process. Yeah.
yeah, but that's exactly what you're talking about. The expert practitioner working in their craft, um, finding, blind alleys or false starts, figuring out that they are false starts, redoing it. I mean, you think about like just
Yeah.
regular songwriting and sitting there with a chord progression and being like, this isn't quite right. Something else has to be in here, or something has to come out. And then you figure it out, and suddenly you've got, Ain't Talking About Love, or something like that.
I mean, the imagination it takes for especially the multiple ones,
Mm.
because I imagine, and I haven't done one, but I imagine you're listening to the groove of one song. Have you ever like listened to the groove of one song and started singing different lyrics over it? Like, hey, this is kind of like this one.
I
But
haven't done that. What I've done instead, because I'm like constantly humming or whistling, in part because I often am hearing stuff, either like stuff that I just heard, like,
right,
so one of the songs that we're going to talk about in a bit is a mashup of Black Sabbath's Supernaut and Aretha Franklin's Chain of Fools. And when I hear Supernaut, I've got it stuck in my head, da 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 da. Da. Now that, because of similarities to other songs, could morph into
right,
a different line, right? I'm not going to be singing lyrics over it, but I'm going to be humming that until suddenly it transforms into Hell Bent for Leather, um, and it's because of noting similarities in the lines between them, so pattern recognition. And it can sometimes be a little bit of pain in the ass, because you're trying to concentrate on one song and it's reminding you of another.
yeah,
But you can also sometimes, this is a little bit off topic, sometimes you're listening to something and you're like, holy crap, they ripped off this
right,
other riff from this musician over here, right?
exactly, yeah. That happens too. Well, that just happened with well, speaking of Marvin Gaye, that happened with the Ed Sheeran tune, right? That actually went to court.
Oh,
It was,
right.
it was actually the same exact progression. It was the same, and it's the sad thing is it's kind of hard to argue,
Yeah.
So the estate didn't win that case, but it was clearly the same rhythm, the same riff, the same chords, the same, and at times the same melody, but the hard part about going after these mashups, well, the easier part of going about these mashups, I mean, is that it's not like the song, it is the song,
Yeah. Yeah.
so that would be the easier part of going after it. But anyway, yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about some aesthetic issues, and we'll use some of the examples that Andy brought up in here, coming from the early aughts when they were called bootlegs.
Yes.
So, we can ask some important questions like, well, are these really just derivative works? Using raw material that others have produced and then just kind of recombining them, sort of like, if we're thinking in culinary terms, you know, you go to the store, you buy a cake, it doesn't have frosting on it. You buy a thing of frosting, you put the frosting on. You didn't bake a cake, you,
Right.
you did something. And I think Oh, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just going to say that's a great example. I love that one.
Yeah, I mean, or like you're making drinks, right? You mix a liquor with a mixer, and you make a Bloody Mary, or even simpler, a screwdriver. Okay, you mixed a drink, but you sure as hell didn't make the liquor or the mixer that you're putting it in. And I want to say that, okay, for crappy mashups, maybe that's the case, right?
Right.
You're just like slapping some stuff together. For good ones, maybe we can say the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. You
Mm,
know, you produce something new, which is clearly to some degree derivative, but it is, it's bringing something new. So Andy had a bunch of examples. DJ French Bloke brought together Destiny's Child, Jumpin' and the Dead Kennedys, California, Uber Alles. Okay,
mm,
making that fit together, I think, requires a certain kind of creativity. And you said the word imagination. I think that that's important. That faculty of imagination is involved. Um, Too Many DJs brought together Salt and Peppa's "Push It" and the Stooges' "No Fun Girl." No fun. So that's kind of interesting. Um,
mm.
Freelance Hellraiser brought together Christina Aguilera's "Genie in a Bottle" and the Strokes' "Hard to Explain." So when we've got things that are different from each other, bringing them together into a new composition, um, arguably, if you do it well, if we respond to it and say this is
Yeah.
pretty cool, there's something new coming into being. And so, think of some of the examples that we have where it's not metal and metal songs, like, okay, so Maiden Goes to Hollywood's Iron Maiden plus Frankie Goes to Hollywood mashup. Very interesting there, because there's also some thematic stuff. It's Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner and Frankie Goes to Hollywood's Relax,
Right.
and the mash-upper said both of these are ultimately in some way derived from Samuel Taylor Coleridge. One
Mm.
is from Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner, obviously, right? And the other is from the poem Kubla Khan, which I guess inspired the album that Relax is on,
Oh, I didn't know that.
Inside the Pleasure Dome, right? So, there's some thought put into that, and is it producing something arguably new where the sum is greater than the whole of its parts? Um, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it is new. I mean, it's like I say, if I keep thinking when I was watching some of the examples that we were talking about,
Yeah,
I asked myself if I thought either I could or I had the patience to do a mashup myself, being a musician.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
What was your answer?
well, I don't know if I could. I mean, the task would be pretty great. Like I said, the hard part would be to find the two songs. So I don't like, how would I go about it? Would I find one song first and then see what I could hear going on with it?
Yeah,
It's coming up with even just the two as the foundation going, thinking how I would do it. So it's not something, I don't think it's something that everybody could do. I think these people have uh, a certain degree of creativity to and when I see these things and start laughing, I'm not laughing because they're funny as much as how did you do this, or you
yeah,
know like this fits absolutely perfectly, or I actually like this version. I really like the rat and the heard it through the grapevine. I mean, the chorus is epic. You know,
yeah,
the chorus is really great with the chord changes under it that aren't on the original. So it's in a way, I guess it's reharmed by another band. But no, I definitely think I don't know if I would. I certainly wouldn't have the patience, but I don't know if I'd have the ability. And if I got lucky, maybe I'd be able to do one. So
so here's an interesting question. Some of the ones that we looked at are, let's call it metal on metal, to steal Anvil's famous song and an album, right? Because you're taking two metal songs and you're mashing them up together. And some examples of these would be Whole Lot of Sabbath, which is Led Zeppelin's
Yep.
Whole Lot of Love, plus Black Sabbath's War Pigs, Judas Priest and Led Zeppelin, Heartbreak for Leather, Led
Which,
Zeppelin and Iron Maiden's Whole Lot of Trooper. And you notice that some of the same songs keep coming up, right? The
although
Trooper gets used a lot, Whole Lot of Love gets used a lot.
Heartbreaker isn't the song that they use, though. It's
What was it?
oh my gosh, I'm forgetting because when I clicked on that one, uh, maybe the word heartbreak worked with the title. It
Yeah,
was.
yeah.
If you listen to it, it's not Heartbreaker. It's another Led Zeppelin song, and I'm
Okay.
blanking on it. But that was interesting that they used that because it maybe it just the title worked better. We know Heartbreaker
Yeah.
is a Led Zeppelin song.
Yeah, and I think there's that tongue-in-cheek aspect too, that we were talking about earlier, the humor thing. But, yeah, coming back to this, so, we've got, like, a combination of Panama and Rat, Breaking the Trooper, which was not very successful, I thought, actually,
Yeah.
where they took Breaking the Law and The Trooper, which are two really great songs, and, anyway, what I was gonna ask you is, that process of thinking, "Hey, this could go with this," right? So when they're in the same basic genre, do you think it requires less imagination to make that leap? To say, I could take, so here's an example. Really good one. Iron Maiden's The Trooper, Megadeth Sweating Bullets. I think that one worked quite well. But they're still within the metal genre. It's one thing to do that. It's a whole different thing to put together, um, you know, uh, Judas Priest and Michael Jackson and Billie Jean's Got Another Thing Coming, or Rick James and Ronnie James Dio and Holy Mary Jane, Or here, the one that I didn't particularly care for that much was Metallica's Land Down Under, where they basically took
Right.
the lyrics to one and superimposed it over that. But I mean, I think it takes more imagination to say Metallica over here, Men at Work over here, than to say Metallica Iron Maiden or Metallica Judas Priest, or what do you think?
To do it within the same genre, I don't know. I mean, part of me thinks that might be a little more difficult.
Oh, really?
It might.
So to do metal and metal, is it because so many metal songs could kind of sound alike?
Yeah, I think you have to find the right to. I think maybe because the ones that aren't metal in metal are so apparent that they're different,
Yeah.
right? Mixing metal with metal. I don't know. Maybe I'm just saying that because maybe that doesn't appeal to me as much.
Okay.
I mean, it's still good. It could still be really good, but it's not like the, seeing Smokey Robinson sing with Metallica or early
Yeah.
Metallica, or that would be that to me is a little more creative. But I don't know. It could go either way because I mean, Whole Lot of Love and War Pigs. The riffs are kind of similar.
Yeah, that one worked, I thought, very well.
Yeah,
It'd be interesting to know how much, like, coordination was actually required. I suspect not too much,
right. Well, a
you
lot of
know?
them are in the same key to begin with, like
Okay.
easy popular key. I mean, it's not the only key metal bands play in, but like 90% of Iron Maiden is in E minor.
Okay.
So if you could find, yeah, I mean the keys tend to be guitar keys in metal, just because the riffs usually come from guitar.
Yeah.
Um, so I don't know. It could. It depends on which one. I mean, I guess the litmus test would be, would I be able to do that easier? The answer is probably no. I probably wouldn't be very good at this, you know, because it's not like I look at any of these videos, metal on metal, and go, oh yeah, that I could do that. I didn't say that once.
Yeah, yeah. Andy had an interesting follow-up. Wanted to comment on what Scott said about the lifting and progressions. I remember an interview Dave Grohl gave when he said he initially struggled with accepting praise for drumming in Nirvana because he essentially just lifted and slowed down drum beats from the Gap Band on "Smells Like Teen Spirit."
Oh, that's
Um,
right.
yeah, I mean, so is there a like feeling like it's not really yours, it's not original when you're giving an homage to somebody else or taking what they've done and remixing it?
I mean,
I
if
mean
Dave,
I mean, I say stuff like that kind of in my field where people are like, "Oh, this video was really great." And I'm like, "Well, thank Aristotle because the video's on Aristotle and I'm just telling you what he said, you know? So how can I take credit for it, right?"
it's like if I do a cover song and somebody praises me, and well, that's
I'm just thinking about those cases where young people who don't really know music history are like, "Oh man, it's so awesome! Who's this new artist who's being praised by Kanye or whatever? This Paul McCartney guy, he's going to be huge." And then you're like, "What?"
I remember that.
Yeah.
Or the other one that gets me is if there's a cover song from the 80s that a band's doing,
Oh yeah, yeah.
um, what's the one that first it was it Gwen Stefani did Talk Talk from
Okay.
the 80s, that big hit. Everybody thought it was her tune. It was such a great tune. Well, it is a great tune, but it's not her tune. It was a
Yeah.
hit, you know.
Well, there was that famous case of Diamond Head, who did the original "Am I Evil," and I actually prefer
Oh,
their
that's
version to
right.
the Metallica version. They were opening for Metallica, played "Am I Evil," the crowd started booing them, and they were like, "You shouldn't rip off Metallica like that." And then Metallica got out on stage and they're like, "Listen, you idiots, this is their song."
Oh, I love that. So Metallica actually told the crowd
They
that
had to, yeah, because I mean, the crowd was getting super hostile with Diamond Head, because Metallica had a more commercially successful version. I've also seen Brian Tatler say in interviews that thank God that Metallica covered it because Diamond had never made that much money on albums, and they
right.
sold so many copies of that it meant a revenue stream for the guys in Diamond Head, you know.
I wonder if that happened also with Garage Days when Metallica did Garage Days, because all the money would go
Oh,
to
and
the
like Budgie and yeah, I mean, I think some of those bands were no longer around. The artist would still be.
right.
Um,
The writer would still receive the money.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
Oh, true. Yeah. And so not all the guys in the band were necessarily getting in on that money either. Yeah.
unless you were Van Halen, which they listed everybody as a writer, so they wouldn't fight about money.
Yeah. Smart.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I think the example of Dave Grohl, uh, you know, the Teen Spirit thing. Yeah, he used to drum to the Gap Band stuff all the time. He said, but I mean, a drum beat for Teen Spirit. There's limited stuff you would do to that tune, and he played the drums on it, and it wasn't a Gap. It wasn't a Gap Band song. So
Right.
I mean, anytime somebody sits down and plays a straight 4/4 rock beat, oh man, you're so solid. They didn't invent the beat, you know. So I think Dave Grohl's being
Yeah.
a little modest on that. It's like it's not like it's one thing if you invent a new kind of percussive way to play on a song that makes the song. Um,
Yeah.
like Peter Gabriel's Biko or something. If you don't have that drum beat, it's not Biko. Um,
Yeah. I'm thinking about, like somebody who has a certain kind of style to them. Like Clive Burr, in his drumming, on those first 3
Oh
Iron
god.
Maiden albums. Or another great example of somebody whose style really makes the band is, you know, all the early Megadeth stuff with Dave Ellefson on bass. I mean, Cliff Burton is just a monster on bass on Metallica's stuff, but Dave Ellefson is jazzy, and not that there wasn't other great talent in that band, right? Including the early drummer who's also very jazzy, but that's part of what makes that unique sound for those early albums, I would say, you know.
Oh yeah, you that's a great point. You know, with Cliff, there was a sound, and then post Cliff, there's still a sound, but it's just not the same.
Yeah.
It's not the same, and it's not. People could argue whether if it was better or it was better or worse, but that's you and I always talk about is the bass important? Of course, every instrument is so important. Like when you talked about oh gosh, why am I blanking? Iron Maiden's first drummer. We just said it.
Oh, Clive Burry, yeah.
Clive Burr, yeah.
Yeah.
Um, you know, I personally preferred his drumming. No disrespect to Nico McBrain, but there was definitely the band sounded different. I mean,
Yeah.
of course, when you change the vocalist, the band's going to sound different right off the bat. But to me, the drumming was different. Well, of course, it's going to be different because they're two different people,
Yeah.
and it should sound different. But there's something to be said about the sound and then the transition to other players. It's like it's not the same.
Yeah, whereas, like, with AC/DC, I mean, how many drummers, or actually even Judas Priest too, how many drummers did they go through? Do any of us say, "Oh my god, the drumming was just so amazing in this period"? It was okay,
Yeah, it was good
but
rock solid drumming.
yeah, yeah, and you weren't like, "Oh, well, it was only good Ben when it was Les Binks or, Simon Wright or whoever," I mean, it got to the point where that was one of the things in Spinal Tap that they were kind of making fun of, right? The drummers just kept spontaneously combusting 'cause,
They all
you
die. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So,
Oh my god, yeah.
well, there is one other, let's call it aesthetic issue, that I wanted to hash out before we end, and it's kind of definitional. So when you are mashing up metal with either with metal or with other stuff, are you creating metal music? You're incorporating heavy metal, but these artists who are mashing the stuff up, they're not metal artists. It's hard to say exactly what they are. In the case of, like, combining 2 metal songs, I think to me, it seems pretty straightforward. So the examples that we had with, like, a Whole Lot of Love and War Pigs, I would say that that winds up being a metal composition. The one, Breaking the Trooper, it's taking 2 metal songs that combine kind of unsuccessfully, but I guess it's a metal song. Combining, Megadeth, Sweating Bullets, and Iron Maiden, The Trooper, creates a great metal song. But what's the case when you're combining, like, the Rat Marvin Gaye, or combining No One Like You and the Police's Roxanne? Is it a metal song because it's metal derived? I don't want to say that all of these are heavy metal,
I
you
think
know?
whatever the bass music is. So let's take the Marvin Gaye one.
Mm.
I would say that's a metal tune with Marvin Gaye singing on it.
Okay.
But if they use the music from Grapevine and a metal
Yeah.
singer, that would be a metal singer singing on Motown.
So I saw somebody in one of the comments for one of them, talking about Metal Soul, and it was specifically the one using, Black Sabbath Supernaut and Aretha Franklin's Chain of Fools with a little bit of Ozzy Osbourne mixed in, specifically guitar solos from Randy Rhoads, Jake E. Lee, and Zach Wilde. Now, that's an interesting one because, as we talked about in the past, when we talked about heavy metal covers, Chain of Fools is covered by Tank.
That's
And
right.
it produces a metal song, and it's not just a metal song because it's a metal band taking somebody's thing and then, like, jazzing it up with heavier
Right.
sound or something like that. It works as a metal song, and
Yeah.
nobody knew it would, right? Until Tank thought about taking it. But it's a Motown R&B song that just happens to have elements in it that really fit well with a different approach. Is that a metal song? Combining, the Chain of Fools, I would say, in that composition is about as prevalent as the Supernaut is. Can we consider that metal or not?
I always say the producer with a song, like let's say you're producing my album and I bring you a song. I've got chords, I got lyrics, I kind of got an acoustic version of it. Now it's going to
Okay.
be up to you what direction it's going to go. Like, so the producer
Oh,
will say, well, we're going to need some heavy guitars here. Or, I hear a lot of the synth pop stuff from the 80s decorating this. Or, so if you have a tune, the treatment of the tune, now basically, obviously, if you're a metal band and you bring a song, it's going to stay metal. But let's just say I have a basic song and anything goes. You could basically, take, I wouldn't say any tune, but like, Chain of Fools, I wouldn't have thought to make that a metal tune.
yeah.
It works. Or yeah, or Ride Like the Wind.
I
You
mean,
know,
with some of those, you're like, how in the hell did they
I
think of
know.
this? I mean, was it that they were just like sitting around and
Yeah.
riffing and noodling, and they're like, hey man, let's see what this sounds like,
Yeah, I think I always say Ride Like the Wind is the lyrics are metal. But
Yeah,
Chain of
yeah.
Fools, that's like one of those I would pass by that not thinking, what we need is a metal version of this. But then somebody does it and it works.
Yeah.
I think that's a metal version of the song.
Okay.
Is the song itself metal? The song itself, I mean, you could resort to, well, if you wrote it on paper, it's nothing. It's just a collection of melody and chords, or one chord in the case of Chain of Fools. But yeah, I think it's a metal version of Chain of Fools. So it is metal, but it's a version of something that's not metal. And you can do it the other way around, I guess, although it doesn't seem to happen that way as much.
I mean, you think about the unplugged
Oh yeah.
versions on MTV, what, in the 90s, or
Yep.
was that, did that extend into the 2000s, or was that just like a 90s
That was
thing?
90s. That was like mid 90s, I think, right?
Yeah. Um, I mean, you're taking songs that are originally faster, heavier, with amplification, putting them on acoustic instruments, and then, still the same singers and stuff. Like, you think about Kiss doing their unplugged version, right?
But a lot of them, they kept the same riffs and just played them on acoustic. Like the
Yeah.
Poison one, they were playing it as if they were electric instruments. So
Okay.
I don't know if they did a treatment of. I mean, like the Queensryche one was really good. They used a lot of their quieter tunes that were already lent
I
themselves
guess that would make sense. Yeah. I mean, it's hard to think about how you're going to really crank out something
like Queen of the
that's,
Right.
yeah, that's super heavy. Or like, yeah, can you do, of course, yes, you can do an acoustic version of Iron Maiden's The Trooper, because we see people doing it on the harp or things like that,
Right.
right? Or Judas Priest, The Sentinel.
It would,
Probably off of the heaviest album they ever made. Or if we wanted to, can you do an acoustic version of Painkiller? Yeah, but is it going to be any good? I don't know.
you're gonna have to
I
like
mean,
treat it very different. Like a lot of the acoustic versions, they're not so much that they're missing like some of the main riffs because it might be chord strumming and it might have some of the stuff, but it's not. Since it's not heavy, you have to change the whole thing. So to do a true acoustic version, it wouldn't be like the live. It wouldn't be like the rock, the heavy rock version or the metal version.
Yeah.
Obviously.
Whereas interestingly, Andy and I were talking about this earlier. Judas Priest has their version of Joan Baez's Diamonds and Rust, which is very, very different from the original song. Essentially, it's following the same melody and stuff, but they don't even have the same verses, and then they did an acoustic version of it, which I guess is a little bit more like Joan Baez. It's slowed down. It's a different, it's not a different chord progression. It's a different, what would you call it? Strumming.
Right. Pattern. Different rhythm.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And it's, it's very beautiful and all that. Is it still a metal song? I don't think so.
I mean, I would say
metal derived.
I would say it's just an acoustic version of a metal song.
Okay.
Like that's how I put it, because
a coffee house version.
There you go. That's perfect. The coffee house versions. That would be an album, the Coffee House Sessions, where bands have done that before. They put out acoustic versions of the songs. And you listen, you go, okay, this is the coffee house version of the songs.
Yeah.
That's a good one.
It's probably easier to do that with some things like power ballads than with like straight ahead, I mean, who actually wants to hear a acoustic version of Green Manalishi with a 2-prong crown?
Right.
I don't think I do,
A lot of times I could do without the acoustic versions of songs, like when bands like, well, we're going to do the acoustic part of our set. Oh no. When metal bands do it, I mean.
Yeah, yeah.
You're going to take like this banger that I love and you're going to, strip it down to something artistic, artistic air quotes.
Yeah. Well, I think we've hashed this out pretty well. Oh, there was one other thing I was going to ask you about, particularly as a musician. So I brought up this: if you're combining these things together, is it metal? Do you think, and this is totally speculative, that there's some genres that like predominate when you mix them together over others, like because of its heaviness, because of its hardness and fast tempo? Does metal, if you combine it with other stuff, is there like a risk of it essentially making everything metal?
Oh, well, you mean, for example, if you took
a metal song and a pop song and you bring them together?
Well, you mean for it to remain metal? Yeah, like what if we took, just classic rock's a different thing. If you took Roger Daltrey's voice and put it over a metal tune, that could possibly, I wouldn't say the Who is metal.
Yeah.
But he's got like a powerhouse voice on some stuff like Love Reign Over Me or
yeah.
So I guess it would have to be somebody that's got would we call it metal adjacent voice?
Yeah.
It wouldn't be Till Tuesday. It wouldn't be Amy Mann.
Or some really breathy singer,
Yeah, like John Mayer, like,
Yeah.
That wouldn't do it. But I'm trying to think, anybody like with kind of a powerhouse voice in pop or rock. I think it could. I'm trying to think of examples. I thought of Roger Daltrey immediately, but
somebody else who kind of comes up very metal adjacent, Thin Lizzy's bassist and composer and lead singer Phil Lynott.
Oh God, well, yeah,
he's got a great voice. It's definitely not a metal voice. It's very distinctive. So if he's singing The Trooper, I don't know that it's that metal anymore.
that would be entertaining.
Yeah.
I would click on that to hear it. That I would be curious to hear what it sounds like.
Yeah,
But
or him doing Hell Bent for Leather, or
yeah, because he's kind of like his. It works when he does it. It's
yeah,
like Mark Knopfler from Dire Straits. It works because he's got this honest kind of blue collar Scottish voice, but it only works when he does it. It doesn't really if if somebody he wouldn't be singing with another band.
yeah, yeah.
So I think Phil Lynott is in that category.
Okay. Well, this is a pretty far-ranging conversation, so hopefully people got something out of it. Thanks again, Scott, for
My pleasure.
I think you might have pitched this originally.
Maybe.
We've been talking about this for a while, so yeah.
Yeah, it's a good one. It worked. I think it worked. I think it was great. It is a fine line with the ethical issue. You
Yeah.
know, so
Well,
that's
and the aesthetic issues, I think, too,
yeah, yeah, absolutely.
It's hard to
Yeah.
define what makes these good. We know
Oh,
that some of them are good. We know that some of them aren't.
I know some of them were just didn't work. They sounded amateurish a little bit,
Yeah.
which I shouldn't say because I couldn't even do it that good. So, but,
Well,
but some of them,
me even less, so,
but definitely some of them hit them out of the park. I thought.
yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we're gonna wrap up here then. Any last words you want to say, Scott? Or
No, I think we covered it all. I just think it was a cool topic. It was a lot of fun to talk about.